Picture yourself complaining about your morning commute while your coffee gets cold. And imagine people who turned the world's largest oven into their home office, a place where the sand gets hot enough to fry eggs and cold enough at night to make you shiver like your apartment's heater just broke in January. Tonight, we're exploring how nomadic peoples didn't just survive in the Sahara. They turned it into humanity's first transcontinental highway system, creating trade networks that would make Amazon's logistics team weep with envy. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing disasters. They were sophisticated entrepreneurs who saw opportunity where everyone else saw certain death. This isn't about romantic desert wanderers or Hollywood adventures. This is about real people who developed survival technologies that would impress Navy SEALs, navigation systems more reliable than early GPS, and business models so successful they dominated international trade for over 1,000 years. So settle in comfortably, adjust those pillows, and maybe appreciate that glass of water next to your bed. It would have been worth more than gold to our desert entrepreneurs. Like this video if you're ready to discover how humans turned impossible into profitable, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Our story begins when the Sahara was still green, and people had to choose, abandon their homeland or become the most badass desert survivors in human history. Picture scrolling through your weather app and seeing 140 degrees for the high and 32 degrees for the low. That's essentially what happened to the Sahara over thousands of years. Except imagine this climate change happening so slowly that your great-great-grandchildren would inherit a completely different world than the one you were born into. Around 8,000 years ago, the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. It smelled like wet earth after rain, with the green scent of grass that stretched beyond the horizon. You can imagine the sound of flowing water, where today there's only the whistle of wind across sand dunes that bury the bones of ancient hippos. Archaeological evidence shows rivers as wide as the Mississippi flowing through areas that now haven't seen rain in decades. But climate change, the natural kind that happens over millennia, gradually shifted rainfall patterns southward. Picture watching your grandfather's fishing holes become muddy wallows, then cracked earth, then sand dunes that buried all traces of the lakes where your ancestors caught dinner. The air that once carried the moisture of vast wetlands slowly became so dry it would crack your lips within hours and make your nostrils ache with every breath. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe, like something from a disaster movie. It was more like watching paint dry, except the paint was your entire civilization. Some communities packed up and followed the rains south. Others looked at the expanding wasteland and thought, "Hold my fermented date wine, we're going to make this work." Those crazy enough to stay became the ancestors of the world's most sophisticated desert survival experts. The irony is delicious. Environmental disaster created some of history's most successful entrepreneurs. Like tech startups that thrive during economic crashes, these desert pioneers used environmental pressure to develop capabilities that would make them incredibly wealthy when the Sahara became a highway for international trade. Their catastrophe became their competitive advantage. Even today, you can find traces of that green Sahara in rock art, paintings of cattle herds and river scenes that serve as ancient Instagram posts from a world that seems impossible. The taste of dust and grit in desert air carries the memory of streams where crocodiles once basked in what is now pure sand. Picture living in a place that's basically a giant outdoor sauna during the day and a walk-in freezer at night. Except the sauna is set to pizza oven, and the freezer comes with a side of suffocating dryness that makes your entire respiratory system feel like sandpaper. Daytime temperatures in the Sahara regularly hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot enough to cook an egg on a rock. People have actually tested this, because apparently humans will experiment with cooking on anything when they're bored enough. Meanwhile, nighttime temperatures can drop to near freezing, creating temperature swings that would destroy most modern electronics and make camping enthusiasts weep for their sleeping bags. The smell of superheated sand mixed with your own sweat creates an aroma that's part beach vacation, part industrial accident. Imagine trying to walk on sand so hot it can cause third-degree burns through thin shoes, while breathing air so dry it immediately starts mummifying your nasal passages. The sound of your own labored breathing becomes constantly audible because every breath requires conscious effort in air that has less moisture than most vacuum cleaners. But temperature was just the opening act. Water scarcity in the Sahara makes California droughts look like minor inconveniences. Some areas receive less than 0.1 inches of rain per year. That's like getting a light mist once every few years if you're lucky. When rain does come, it often evaporates before hitting the ground, creating the ultimate tease that smells like wet earth for about 30 seconds before disappearing forever. The psychological impact of constant dehydration includes symptoms that would make modern people call 911. Chronic headaches, difficulty concentrating, and the persistent taste of copper pennies in your mouth. Yet nomadic peoples learned to function normally in conditions where most humans would become delirious within days. Picture developing survival strategies where every single decision about movement, timing, and resource use could literally determine whether you'd see another sunrise. Modern people complain when their office temperature varies by 5 degrees. Desert nomads thrived in conditions that swung 100 degrees daily, while actively trying to kill them through dehydration. Picture ancient cave paintings as humanity's first survival blog. Except instead of posting "what I ate today" on Instagram, they were documenting how we avoided dying today in permanent rock art that would outlast every social media platform ever invented. The earliest paintings show people living the good life along rivers and lakes, with scenes that look like ancient vacation photos, fishing, farming, and hunting in landscapes that resembled modern African nature preserves. You can almost smell the wood smoke from cooking fires and hear children splashing in water that supported permanent villages. These weren't primitive cave dwellers. They were sophisticated societies with agriculture, pottery, and social structures complex enough to create impressive art. But as you follow the chronological sequence, you can literally watch the adaptation happening in real time across generations. It's like a slow-motion documentary where each painting shows families making increasingly desperate or increasingly clever decisions about how to survive their changing world. The paintings gradually show fewer fishing scenes and more cattle herding, suggesting communities that were essentially pivoting their entire business model from agriculture to nomadic pastoralism. The fascinating is watching prehistoric entrepreneurs in action. Some paintings show groups that tried to maintain farming lifestyles in increasingly difficult conditions, essentially the ancient equivalent of people who refuse to admit their startup is failing. Others document early adopters of nomadic strategies that proved more sustainable, like ancient venture capitalists who spotted the next big thing before everyone else. The rock art also shows technological innovation happening in real time. You can see the gradual appearance of better water storage, improved animal management techniques, and eventually camels, which were basically the Tesla of ancient transportation technology. Picture prehistoric R&D departments working on solutions to problems that would determine whether entire communities lived or died. The smell of ancient pigments mixed with desert dust creates an eerie connection to people who faced impossible choices and somehow made the right ones. Modern archaeologists have to work quickly because wind erosion and sand burial are constantly destroying evidence. Imagine trying to preserve humanity's most important survival manual when the environment that created it is still trying to erase the proof. Picture the moment when someone first convinced a camel to carry heavy loads across burning sand. It was basically like inventing the pickup truck, except your vehicle had opinions, could spit with deadly accuracy, and came with built-in GPS that worked by smell and remembered every water source within a 500-mile radius. Camels are essentially biological all-terrain vehicles engineered by evolution for conditions that would destroy a Land Rover within days. Their feet work like natural snowshoes for sand, broad, padded hooves that distribute weight perfectly while providing traction that would make tire engineers weep with envy. Imagine having transportation that never needs gas stations, can carry 400 pounds while running on thorns and scrub brush, and comes with a water storage system that makes military survival gear look amateur. But the real magic is in their physiology. Camels can drink 40 gallons of water in 10 minutes, That's like chugging 320 bottles of water in one sitting without getting sick. Then go weeks without drinking again while working in temperatures that would send humans to the emergency room. Their body temperature can vary by 11 degrees without causing distress, essentially giving them internal air conditioning that adapts automatically to daily temperature swings. The smell of camel became the signature scent of Saharan commerce, a distinctive mixture of fur, dried sweat, and something vaguely prehistoric that you could detect from miles away. Picture medieval trade routes where valuable caravans announced their approach through aroma before they became visible, where the sound of camel bells created excitement in remote communities because it meant contact with the outside world and access to goods that traveled thousands of miles. Training camels required developing skills that combined animal psychology, mechanical engineering, and professional wrestling. These animals are intelligent, stubborn, and potentially dangerous when annoyed. They can bite with the force of a hydraulic press, kick like furry pile drivers, and spit with accuracy that would impress artillery specialists. Imagine working with transportation that had strong opinions about routes, schedules, and working conditions, where successful travel required negotiation rather than simple control. The economic revolution was immediate. Suddenly, salt that was worthless in coastal areas became more valuable than gold in inland regions, and the people who controlled camel-based logistics could charge premium prices for moving merchandise across routes that had been impassable. Picture ancient Amazon Prime, except delivery took months, and your package might arrive covered in camel slobber. Picture discovering a Starbucks in the middle of an apocalyptic wasteland. Except instead of overpriced coffee, you get life-saving water. And instead of Wi-Fi, you get the chance to not die horribly in the next 24 hours. Oases weren't just rest stops. They were the medieval equivalent of international airports, where survival met commerce in ways that would make modern business schools write case studies. Approaching an oasis after days of travel across barren wasteland created the same excitement modern people feel when seeing their destination city after a delayed flight. Except the stakes were slightly higher, considering that missing this terminal could mean becoming buzzard food within days. The sight of date palms on the horizon triggered celebrations that combined relief, joy, and the kind of gratitude usually reserved for winning the lottery. But oases functioned as sophisticated international business hubs where trade routes converged, and travelers from across Africa and the Mediterranean met to exchange goods, information, and probably some very colorful stories. Imagine bustling marketplaces where Moroccan merchants haggled with Nigerian traders, while Egyptian pilgrims shared travel tips with Spanish adventurers, all united by their desperate need for the precious water that made these meetings possible. The smell of oasis life was intoxicating, a mixture of palm wine, cooking fires, animal waste, and the omnipresent scent of precious water that could motivate people through weeks of brutal travel. Picture an aroma that combined the best aspects of a farmer's market with the less pleasant realities of medieval sanitation, where the perfume of life-sustaining resources mixed with the honest stench of human and animal survival. Water access was regulated with the precision of modern air traffic control, with complex agreements about usage rights, seasonal restrictions, and payment systems that ensured sustainable use of limited resources. Every drop was accounted for because wasting water wasn't just inconsiderate. It was potentially murderous to future travelers who might arrive to find empty wells and certain death. Date palm cultivation created complete ecosystem management that would impress modern sustainability experts. The palms provided shade for other crops, materials for construction and tools, and even fermented beverages that provided both calories and social lubrication for business negotiations. Picture agricultural systems so efficient they supported international commerce while maintaining environmental balance in some of Earth's harshest conditions. However, oasis dependency created vulnerabilities that could destroy entire communities overnight. Political conflicts, environmental changes, or simple resource depletion could force sudden relocation that left people stranded between distant water sources with inadequate supplies. Imagine having your entire survival strategy based on geographical features that could become inaccessible due to factors completely beyond your control. Picture trying to run a corporation where your office moves constantly across thousands of miles. Your employees might be scattered across 3 countries, and your HR department has to function without email, phones, or any permanent address. Tuareg society solved organizational challenges that would make modern management consultants charge premium fees for solutions half as effective. Tribal hierarchies balanced individual freedom with collective survival needs, creating social structures that were essentially democratic startups with life or death stakes. Imagine workplace dynamics where bad management decisions didn't just affect quarterly profits. They could literally result in your entire team dying of thirst in the middle of nowhere. The smell of council meetings mixed wood smoke with nervous sweat and the omnipresent dust that got into everything, including crucial decision-making processes. Marriage networks functioned as sophisticated insurance systems that extended across vast geographical areas and provided emergency resources that modern people would recognize as comprehensive social safety nets. Picture family relationships that weren't just emotional bonds, but practical survival alliances that could provide water, camels, and refuge during crises that threatened individual family groups. These weren't romantic arrangements, they were strategic partnerships where compatibility included survival skills and resource management abilities. Social status was determined by practical expertise rather than inherited wealth or land ownership that couldn't be transported efficiently across desert terrain. Knowledge of water sources, navigation skills, and trading relationships became more valuable than material possessions, creating meritocracies where your reputation was based on your ability to keep people alive in impossible conditions rather than your ability to accumulate static wealth. Gender roles adapted to survival requirements that didn't always respect traditional hierarchies. Women often controlled water resources and managed camp logistics that were essential for group survival, while men typically handled long-distance trading and external negotiations. Picture role flexibility driven by necessity rather than ideology, where survival trumped social conventions when practical adaptation was required for community survival. Conflict resolution had to work without permanent courts, police forces, or any external authority that could enforce decisions. Communities developed systems of mediation and social pressure that could maintain order among people who might be isolated together for months at a time, with no possibility of escape or outside intervention. Imagine legal systems that had to be portable, memorable, and effective when enforcement options were limited to peer pressure and reputation damage. The transmission of survival knowledge required educational systems that functioned without schools, books, or permanent institutions. Children learned navigation, animal management, and resource conservation through daily life experiences that were essentially survival training disguised as play. Picture childhood education where games involved practicing skills that could literally save lives years later, where fun activities prepared young people for adult responsibilities that included life or death decision-making. Picture your brain essentially blue screening from environmental stress, creating vivid hallucinations that could convince you to walk toward non-existent water sources and certain death. Desert psychology wasn't just about staying positive. It was about maintaining sanity when your neurological hardware was being systematically scrambled by dehydration, heat stress, and sensory deprivation that would challenge modern psychiatric treatment. Desert hallucinations are terrifyingly real. Your dehydrated brain starts manufacturing sights and sounds based on desperate wishful thinking rather than actual sensory input. Imagine seeing crystal-clear lakes, bustling cities, or long-dead relatives so convincingly that experienced travelers would argue about whether to investigate what their eyes insisted was obviously real water. The sound of imaginary flowing streams could drown out actual warning calls from your companions, while phantom oases could lead groups miles off course toward empty sand and delayed death. Loneliness in desert conditions takes on dimensions that social media addicts can't comprehend. Picture being stuck with the same small group for months, where personality conflicts can't be resolved by blocking someone or finding new friends, where interpersonal harmony literally determines whether everyone lives or dies. The smell of unwashed bodies becomes so familiar it disappears from conscious awareness, while every annoying habit of your traveling companions gets magnified into potentially rage-inducing triggers. Traditional coping mechanisms included storytelling, music, and ritual activities that weren't just entertainment, but essential mental health maintenance. These weren't casual campfire songs, they were psychological survival tools that helped people process stress and maintain emotional stability under conditions that would require serious medication in modern contexts. Picture group therapy disguised as cultural activities, where singing together literally kept people from going insane. Time perception becomes completely distorted when days blur together without landmarks, schedules, or environmental variations that normally help people maintain psychological orientation. Imagine losing track not just of dates and weeks, but of your entire sense of temporal framework, where your only calendar becomes immediate survival needs rather than social obligations or external time structures. Sleep in desert conditions involves dealing with temperature swings, constant vigilance, and stress levels that create rest patterns resembling modern insomnia more than healthy sleep cycles. The sound of wind across sand becomes either soothing background noise or anxiety-inducing reminder of your isolation, depending on your current mental state and how long you've been traveling without seeing other humans. Religious practices provided psychological anchoring that went beyond spiritual comfort, to include practical mental health benefits that helped people maintain hope and purpose when physical conditions pushed human endurance past normal limits. Picture belief systems that functioned as both spiritual guidance and psychological medication, where faith wasn't just about afterlife concerns, but immediate survival of sanity-threatening experiences. But the most shocking discoveries lay ahead, when these people realized that the desert's greatest threat wasn't heat or cold, but that life-sustaining water could be just feet beneath their boots. Yet finding it meant the difference between thriving communities and mass graves buried under shifting sand. Picture learning to read the desert like a massive geological textbook written in a language that most people would never notice, where ancient riverbeds become invisible highways leading to water sources that could save your life or condemn you to die, with tantalizingly close salvation just out of reach. Wadi navigation, following the courses of rivers that dried up thousands of years ago, was basically ancient GPS technology that worked by training your eyes to detect clues that would make modern geologists jealous. Experienced guides could spot subtle changes in sand color, rock arrangements, and vegetation patterns that indicated where water had flowed millennia ago, and might still be accessible through careful digging or natural springs. The skill required, developing almost supernatural environmental awareness that combined multiple senses with geological knowledge passed down through generations. You could literally smell moisture in the landscape, detecting humidity indicators through combinations of air composition, soil chemistry, and even the behavior of insects that gathered around underground water sources. Picture developing sensory abilities that would seem like magic to modern people, where decades of desert experience created enhanced perception that could distinguish between different types of water sources from miles away. The sound of footsteps changed when walking over buried watercourses, creating audio feedback that experienced travelers learned to interpret like natural sonar systems. Imagine walking across sand that looked identical in every direction, yet knowing from subtle acoustic cues that you were following an ancient river channel that could lead to wells or springs. The crunch of sand over buried rock sounded different from sand over sand, while areas with underground moisture created slightly different echoes that trained ears could detect. But wadi navigation carried serious risks alongside its benefits. Following ancient watercourses could lead travelers miles from known safe routes, and geological evidence that was thousands of years old didn't guarantee that promised water sources would still be accessible or safe. Picture making life or death navigation decisions based on environmental clues that might be completely obsolete, where trusting ancient river patterns could mean discovering either salvation or elaborate geological pranks that left you further from safety than when you started. The integration of wadi knowledge with astronomical navigation created comprehensive wayfinding systems that combined geological awareness with stellar positioning, allowing experienced guides to maintain accurate direction while following water-finding routes that might involve significant detours from direct travel paths. Picture medieval engineers building underground water highways that would make modern civil engineers submit grant proposals just to study them. Networks of hand-dug tunnels that transported water across dozens of miles using only gravity, human labor, and engineering knowledge that rivals contemporary infrastructure projects. Qanat systems, known locally as fogara, were essentially ancient aqueducts that required workers to spend years excavating tunnels through solid rock, using tools that would make modern construction crews file safety complaints within minutes. The smell of underground work, stale air, rock dust, and human sweat became the signature scent of communities willing to invest everything in water security that could sustain them for generations. The engineering precision required was mind-boggling. Workers had to maintain tunnel gradients across distances exceeding 30 miles, ensuring water flow rates that wouldn't cause erosion while preventing stagnation that could contaminate the entire system. Imagine calculating hydraulic engineering using only practical experience and trial and error testing, where mathematical mistakes meant months of wasted work, and communities that might not survive the delay. Construction crews worked in shifts underground, developing specialized roles for diggers, shaft builders, and maintenance specialists whose skills were as valuable as modern technical experts. The sound of picks striking rock echoed through tunnels for years as teams advanced inch by inch toward distant water sources, while the taste of rock dust became permanently embedded in workers' mouths and lungs. Cave-ins, flooding, and oxygen depletion were constant threats that required safety protocols developed through bitter experience with accidents that could bury entire work crews. Picture underground construction, where every shift included the possibility of being trapped, suffocated, or crushed. Yet communities continued these projects because water access was literally worth any risk, including the lives of the people building the systems. Social organization around Fagara construction involved entire communities in multi-generational projects that required sustained cooperation and resource investment across decades. Families made sacrifices for infrastructure that might primarily benefit their grandchildren, creating social contracts that bound communities together through shared investment in survival technology that transcended individual lifespans. Maintenance required ongoing vigilance against sand infiltration, structural collapse, and contamination that could destroy water systems representing decades of community investment. The smell of flowing water mixed with underground dampness became the most precious sensory experience in desert communities, representing successful engineering that meant the difference between thriving settlements and abandoned ruins slowly being buried by advancing sand dunes. Picture living in a world where spilling water was considered as offensive as modern people consider littering in national parks. Except the consequences weren't just environmental shame, but potential death sentences for everyone in your community. Water conservation wasn't about being eco-friendly. It was about staying alive long enough to see tomorrow. Traditional water containers were engineering masterpieces that combined chemistry, physics, and material science, using only organic materials available in desert environments. Goatskin bags underwent treatment processes that created nearly waterproof storage while maintaining flexibility and durability that could withstand years of rough handling. The smell of properly prepared leather, mixed with the faint mineral taste of well water, created sensory memories that could sustain psychological morale during the most challenging travel periods. Drinking rituals weren't just cultural ceremonies. They were precision resource management systems disguised as social customs. Picture formal protocols around water consumption that ensured efficient use while reinforcing community bonds and mutual survival obligations. Every sip was measured, shared, and consumed with awareness that waste could literally murder your traveling companions through resource depletion. Water allocation during shortages required mathematical precision combined with social diplomacy that would challenge modern conflict resolution specialists. Communities developed systems for rationing that balanced individual survival needs with group conservation requirements, creating distribution methods that had to account for age, health status, work responsibilities, and social hierarchy, while maintaining enough reserves for emergencies that could affect everyone. Personal hygiene adapted to scarcity through techniques that maintained health and social cleanliness using minimal water resources. Sand became a cleaning agent for everything from dishes to bodies, while dry cleaning methods replaced water-based washing for clothing and equipment. The gritty sensation of sand-scrubbed skin became normal, while the luxury of actual washing with precious water was reserved for special occasions or medical emergencies. Religious practices incorporated conservation principles into spiritual obligations, creating belief systems where wasting water was considered sinful rather than just wasteful. Picture cultures where resource efficiency became moral virtue backed by divine authority, where conservation techniques were transmitted as religious duties that reinforced survival behaviors through spiritual motivation. Social tensions around water allocation could destroy communities when scarcity forced impossible decisions about resource distribution. Priority systems had to determine who received water first during crises, how much individuals could consume during shortages, and what happened to people who violated conservation rules when group survival was at stake. Imagine legal systems where water theft was punishable by exile, essentially a death sentence in desert conditions. Picture developing such detailed knowledge of desert wildlife that you could essentially use animals as a biological GPS system, except your navigation satellites were insects, birds, and mammals whose behavior patterns provided real-time information about water sources, weather changes, and environmental conditions that could guide life or death survival decisions. Bird behavior created aerial highways that experienced observers could follow toward water sources from distances of many miles. Certain species flew directly toward springs and wells during specific times of day, creating predictable flight patterns that functioned like living compass needles pointing toward survival resources. The sound of bird calls in desert environments became crucial audio information. Different species created different acoustic signatures that indicated not just the presence of water, but also its approximate quantity and seasonal reliability. Insect activity provided even more precise local intelligence about water quality and accessibility. Different flies, beetles, and other bugs gathered around different types of water sources, allowing experienced observers to distinguish between fresh springs, stagnant pools, and seasonal runoff before actually reaching water locations. Picture developing entomological expertise that could evaluate water sources by studying bug populations, where the smell of certain insects indicated safe drinking water, while others warned of contamination that could cause fatal illness. Animal tracks in sand created historical databases that showed where creatures had traveled to reach water and how recently those sources had been accessible. Experienced trackers could read footprints like newspapers, understanding stories about animal behavior that revealed crucial survival information, including seasonal availability, predator presence, and water quality indicators that human senses might miss completely. The behavior of domestic animals, particularly camels and goats, provided real-time environmental monitoring that could detect resource availability and weather changes before they became obvious to human observers. Camels could sense water sources from greater distances than people, while goats became restless before sandstorms and sought shelter before temperature changes that could threaten traveling groups. Seasonal migration patterns of both wild and domestic animals created natural calendars that helped nomadic communities time their movements to coincide with optimal resource availability. Picture planning travel schedules around biological systems that had evolved over thousands of years to optimize survival in desert conditions, where following animal migration routes meant accessing water and grazing that wouldn't be available during other seasons. However, animal indicators could provide false information when environmental changes, disease, or human interference disrupted natural behavior patterns that had previously been reliable for generations. Imagine depending on biological early warning systems that could malfunction during precisely the conditions when accurate information was most crucial for survival, where trusting animal behavior could lead groups toward empty water sources and certain death. The integration of animal behavior knowledge with other survival techniques created comprehensive environmental awareness that allowed experienced nomads to extract survival information from landscapes that appeared completely barren to untrained observers, essentially reading the desert like a complex information system written in biological behavior rather than human language. Picture hand-digging wells through solid rock, using only traditional tools while working in shifts that could continue for months, creating construction projects that would make modern drilling crews demand hazard pay, union representation, and psychological counseling before even considering the job. Traditional well-digging tools were masterpieces of efficient design that maximized excavation capability while remaining portable enough for camel transport across vast distances. Iron-tipped digging bars, leather buckets, and rope systems created construction equipment that could function in extreme desert conditions while being maintained using only local materials and traditional blacksmithing techniques. The engineering challenges involved complex geological problems that required understanding different rock types, water table behavior, and structural stability without modern surveying equipment or geological analysis. Picture workers excavating through layers of limestone, sandstone, and granite, each requiring different techniques and tools, while maintaining shaft integrity that could prevent cave-ins and ensure decades of reliable operation. Construction crews developed specialized roles passed down through generations of technical experts whose knowledge was literally worth more than gold in desert communities. The smell of rock dust mixed with human sweat became the signature scent of well construction sites, while the sound of picks striking stone echoed for months as teams advanced toward underground water sources that might be over 100 feet below ground level. The moment when diggers first encountered water created celebrations that combined relief, exhaustion, and spiritual gratitude for successful completion of projects that meant community survival for generations. Picture the sound of water seeping into excavations after months of brutal labor, knowing that your work had created permanent resources that could sustain families through decades of desert survival challenges. Safety protocols developed through bitter experience with accidents that could be fatal in remote locations where medical assistance was unavailable. Cave-ins, oxygen depletion, and equipment failures required emergency procedures and rescue techniques that relied on traditional knowledge and community cooperation rather than modern safety equipment or professional emergency services. Well maintenance required ongoing technical expertise to prevent sand infiltration, structural deterioration, and contamination that could destroy water sources, representing enormous community investment. The taste of fresh well water mixed with the faint mineral content of deep aquifers became precious sensory experiences that reminded communities of successful engineering achievements that enabled survival in impossible conditions. Social organization around well construction involved entire communities in resource investment that required sustained cooperation across extended time periods, creating shared ownership of infrastructure that bound groups together through mutual dependence on engineering projects that transcended individual capabilities and lifespans. Picture designing water storage systems using only organic materials that had to preserve precious liquid for months while surviving camel transport, extreme temperature swings, and handling that would destroy most modern containers within days. Traditional storage wasn't just about holding water, it was about creating portable life support systems that could mean survival or death for entire traveling groups. Leather water containers represented sophisticated materials engineering that combined multiple chemical processes to create storage with properties that wouldn't be matched until synthetic polymers became available centuries later. Goatskin preparation involved tanning treatments using plant materials that created nearly waterproof barriers while maintaining flexibility that could withstand years of rough desert use. The smell of properly treated leather mixed with stored water created distinctive aromas that nomadic peoples associated with security and successful resource management. The science behind traditional storage involved understanding evaporation rates, thermal dynamics, and cooling techniques that could preserve water quality while minimizing losses in extreme conditions. Picture storage systems that used evaporative cooling principles to keep water temperatures tolerable, while reducing loss through strategic design features that maximized efficiency using only materials available in desert environments. Strategic distribution meant spreading water supplies across multiple containers and hidden caches to minimize the catastrophic impact of accidents, theft, or container failure that could threaten group survival. Imagine resource management that required constant risk assessment and mathematical planning to ensure that single incidents couldn't destroy water supplies that communities depended upon for weeks of desert travel. Container maintenance involved regular treatments with natural materials that prevented bacterial growth, sealed microleaks, and maintained water quality during extended storage periods. The taste of water stored in traditional containers, slightly metallic with leather undertones and mineral content from treatment materials, became familiar flavors that desert travelers associated with successful preparation and survival expertise. Underground caching techniques allowed experienced travelers to create hidden water reserves along travel routes, marked with subtle indicators that group members could recognize while remaining invisible to potential raiders or competitors. Picture creating secret supply networks that required perfect memory, precise navigation, and trust that cached resources would remain accessible when needed months later. Transportation storage had to balance water preservation with practical requirements of camel-based logistics, creating container designs that could be efficiently packed, securely fastened, and easily accessed, while remaining protected from damage during movement across rough terrain. The sound of water sloshing in properly secured containers became reassuring audio feedback that indicated adequate supplies for continued travel. Seasonal considerations meant that storage strategies adapted to changing temperature conditions, humidity levels, and travel requirements that varied throughout the year. Different preservation techniques were required for summer versus winter conditions, with container selection and preparation methods optimized for specific environmental challenges that could affect water quality and availability. Picture developing medical expertise, specialized in treating conditions that most modern doctors would only encounter in emergency rooms: severe dehydration, heat stroke, and exposure injuries that were routine health challenges for people whose daily lives pushed human physiology to its absolute limits. Traditional dehydration treatment involved sophisticated understanding of fluid replacement, electrolyte balance, and recovery techniques that could restore severely compromised individuals using only natural materials and accumulated medical knowledge. Experienced healers could recognize dehydration stages that modern medical training would classify as requiring immediate hospitalization. Yet nomadic practitioners successfully treated these conditions using traditional methods that had evolved through generations of desert survival. Heat stroke intervention required immediate cooling techniques that could prevent brain damage and death in patients whose core body temperature had risen to levels that would trigger medical emergencies in modern hospitals. Picture medical procedures performed in desert conditions using traditional cooling methods, natural medications, and treatment protocols that could save lives without modern equipment or pharmaceutical interventions. The smell of medicinal plants mixed with the sweat of heat-exhausted patients became familiar sensory experiences for traditional healers whose expertise could mean the difference between recovery and death for community members suffering from exposure-related illness. Desert pharmacology included detailed knowledge of plants that could treat digestive problems from poor water quality, respiratory issues from constant dust exposure, and skin conditions from sun and wind damage. Emergency treatment protocols had to function when evacuation to medical facilities was impossible, and treatment resources were limited to whatever could be carried by nomadic communities. Picture medical practice that required diagnostic skills, treatment improvisation, and therapeutic techniques that could be effective using only traditional materials and locally available resources. Prevention strategies emphasized behavioral modifications, protective techniques, and risk management that reduced the likelihood of serious heat illness while maintaining the mobility and productivity required for desert survival. Traditional medical knowledge focused primarily on preventing dangerous conditions rather than treating advanced stages that were often fatal despite the best available care. The psychological aspects of desert medicine included treating mental health symptoms that resulted from extreme stress, isolation, and the constant threat of death that accompanied life in hostile environments. Healers developed techniques for managing anxiety, depression, and the psychological breakdown that could occur when individuals were pushed beyond normal human tolerance for environmental stress. Traditional surgical techniques addressed injuries and medical emergencies that occurred in remote locations where modern medical intervention was unavailable for days or weeks. The taste of medicinal herbs mixed with the metallic flavor of blood became familiar experiences for healers who performed procedures that required steady hands, traditional anesthesia, and surgical skills that could save lives using only basic tools and natural materials. But water was only half the survival equation, because once you solved the problem of staying hydrated in hell, you still had to figure out how to move tons of valuable cargo across thousands of miles of shifting sand, while avoiding raiders, sandstorms, and navigation mistakes that could leave entire caravans as bleached bones, marking failed business ventures. Picture organizing a medieval shipping company where your trucks are temperamental animals, your highways are constantly shifting sand, and your GPS is a combination of star positions and ancient oral traditions passed down through generations of people who knew that navigation mistakes meant everyone dies horribly. Caravan organization was essentially mobile city planning that had to function across thousands of miles without permanent infrastructure. A typical trans-Saharan caravan could include 1,000 camels, 400 people, and tons of trade goods arranged in formations that prioritized security, efficiency, and survival logistics that would impress modern military planners. The smell of hundreds of camels mixed with human sweat, cooking fires, and valuable trade goods created distinctive aromas that could be detected from miles away. Leadership hierarchies reflected practical survival requirements rather than social status, with caravan masters whose decisions could affect hundreds of lives and enormous economic investments. Picture corporate executives whose business mistakes could literally result in mass death rather than just quarterly losses, where leadership expertise was measured by successful delivery of people and goods across impossible terrain. Daily organization required military-style coordination, where timing, positioning, and resource management followed precise schedules that balanced travel efficiency with survival requirements. The sound of camel bells and human voices calling out travel orders created acoustic environments that indicated successful movement versus dangerous delays that could expose groups to environmental hazards or security threats. Supply management involved calculating food, water, and equipment needs for journeys that could last months with no opportunity for resupply or emergency assistance. Imagine logistics planning where mathematical errors in resource calculation meant starvation, dehydration, or equipment failure that could strand entire expeditions in hostile wilderness. Security protocols protected valuable cargo and human lives from raiders, environmental disasters, and internal conflicts that could destroy months of preparation and investment. The taste of dust mixed with nervous anticipation became familiar sensory experiences during dangerous portions of travel, where vigilance and preparation determined whether caravans arrived safely or disappeared permanently into desert sand. Picture navigating using an ancient version of satellite navigation, except your satellites were stars that moved predictably across desert skies, and your backup system was reading sand dune patterns, wind directions, and geological features that could guide you across featureless wasteland or lead you straight into death traps. Star navigation required memorizing complex astronomical patterns that functioned like celestial GPS coordinates throughout the year. Experienced navigators could determine position, direction, and travel timing using stellar observations that were as precise as modern electronic systems but required decades of training to master effectively. The smell of cool night air mixed with sand and distant cooking fires became associated with navigation sessions that could determine whether caravans reached their destinations or wandered lost until supplies ran out. Daytime navigation relied on understanding sun positions, shadow patterns, and landscape features that provided directional information when stars weren't visible. Sand dune formations, wind patterns, and geological markers created terrestrial navigation systems that required knowledge of how environmental forces shaped desert terrain over seasons and years. Backup navigation techniques included reading animal behavior, vegetation patterns, and atmospheric conditions that indicated direction, weather changes, and proximity to water sources or human settlements. Picture developing environmental awareness so detailed that experienced guides could navigate accurately using information that most people would never notice or understand. Traditional navigation instruments were simple but effective tools that amplified human observational abilities without requiring complex technology or maintenance. Star charts, shadow sticks, and wind direction indicators created navigation equipment that could function reliably in extreme conditions while remaining portable and durable enough for long-distance desert travel. The consequences of navigation errors were immediate and often fatal. Getting lost in the Sahara meant facing dehydration, starvation, and exposure that could eliminate entire caravans within days of losing their intended routes. The taste of growing desperation, mixed with the metallic flavor of fear, became familiar experiences for travelers who realized they might be wandering in wrong directions with limited time to correct potentially fatal mistakes. Training navigation specialists required extensive apprenticeships where students learned through practical experience that combined theoretical knowledge with survival skills that could only be developed through years of actual desert travel under expert supervision. Picture salt being more valuable than cocaine in modern drug markets. White crystalline substances that people would risk their lives to transport across thousands of miles, where successful salt trading could make families wealthy for generations, while failed expeditions left traders buried under sand dunes with their precious cargo. Saharan salt mining operations were essentially ancient industrial sites, where workers extracted mineral wealth from underground deposits and surface evaporation areas, using techniques that would challenge modern mining operations. The smell of salt-saturated air mixed with human sweat and the sound of picks striking salt crystals created work environments that were both valuable and brutally difficult. Salt quality determined market value in ways that required expert evaluation of color, texture, and mineral content that affected both culinary and preservation applications. Picture commodity trading, where product expertise could mean the difference between profitable ventures and economic disasters, where salt graders developed sensory skills that could evaluate valuable cargo through taste, smell, and visual inspection. Transportation logistics for salt cargo required specialized packing, loading, and protection techniques that prevented contamination, breakage, and theft during months of desert travel. Salt blocks had to be wrapped, secured, and arranged on camel loads in ways that maximized cargo capacity while ensuring that valuable merchandise arrived at markets in sellable condition. Market dynamics created price fluctuations that could make salt trading incredibly profitable or economically ruinous, depending on timing, competition, and demand factors that traders couldn't always predict or control. The taste of expensive salt, mixed with the bitter flavor of commercial disappointment, became familiar experiences for merchants whose fortunes depended on commodity markets that operated across vast distances and cultural boundaries. Mining communities developed around salt deposits, creating settlements that combined extraction operations with trading centers that supported caravan operations. These weren't just industrial sites, but social centers where miners, traders, and support workers created complex economies based entirely on salt production and distribution. Labor conditions in salt mining involved health hazards, dangerous working conditions, and physical demands that made salt extraction a challenging occupation, even by medieval standards. Workers faced respiratory problems from salt dust, skin irritation from constant mineral exposure, and the general health risks associated with intensive physical labor in desert environments. Picture running international business deals using only handshakes, reputation, and trust relationships, where contracts couldn't be enforced by courts, because the nearest legal authority might be 1,000 miles away, and everyone involved could be dead from natural causes before disputes got resolved. Barter systems created complex exchange rates between different goods that required mathematical skills, market knowledge, and negotiation expertise that would impress modern commodity traders. Salt, gold, ivory, and manufactured goods had relative values that fluctuated based on supply, demand, and regional preferences that merchants had to understand across multiple cultures and economic systems. Language barriers meant that successful trading required communication skills that combined basic linguistics, gesture systems, and cultural knowledge that could prevent misunderstandings that might result in commercial failures or violent conflicts. The smell of diverse spices, perfumes, and trade goods mixed with the sweat of nervous merchants created sensory environments that indicated active commercial negotiations. Trust networks extended across vast geographical areas and cultural boundaries, creating business relationships that could span continents and operate reliably, despite the absence of legal institutions that could enforce agreements or resolve disputes. Picture commercial relationships based entirely on reputation and mutual benefit, where dishonest dealing could destroy business prospects permanently across entire trade networks. Quality assessment involved expertise in evaluating merchandise that might include precious metals, exotic spices, crafted goods, and raw materials whose value depended on characteristics that could only be determined through experience and specialized knowledge. The taste of sample goods, the feel of textile quality, and the appearance of metal purity became crucial sensory skills for merchants whose profit margins depended on accurate product evaluation. Commercial intelligence involved gathering information about market conditions, political situations, and economic opportunities across multiple regions and cultures. Successful traders needed to understand not just their own merchandise, but also competing products, customer preferences, and timing factors that could affect profitability of trading expeditions that required months of preparation and travel. Risk management balanced potential profits against dangers that included theft, political conflicts, environmental disasters, and market changes that could occur during the extended time periods required for transcontinental trade operations. Picture traveling with millions of dollars in cargo through lawless territory, where the local security force consists of whoever has the most camels and the sharpest swords. And your insurance policy is hoping that raiders find easier targets or get distracted by internal feuds before they notice your valuable merchandise. Caravan security required military organization that could defend against raiders while maintaining commercial operations across thousands of miles of uncontrolled territory. Armed guards, scouts, and defensive formations created mobile fortresses that could repel attacks while continuing profitable trade operations. The smell of weapon oil mixed with nervous sweat became familiar during dangerous travel sections where vigilance meant survival. Protection payments to local tribes functioned like medieval taxation systems, where caravans paid fees for safe passage through territorial areas controlled by groups who could provide either security or threats, depending on payment arrangements. Picture paying highway tolls to armed bands who might rob you anyway if they decided your cargo was worth more than your ongoing business relationship. Intelligence networks provided advance warning about raider activity, political conflicts, and security conditions that could affect caravan safety during different seasons and routes. Successful merchants maintained information sources that included paid informants, allied traders, and tribal contacts who could provide crucial security updates about dangerous areas or safe timing for valuable shipments. Defensive tactics included convoy formations, emergency procedures, and combat techniques that balanced protection with mobility requirements for loaded caravans. The sound of weapons being readied and the taste of adrenaline mixed with desert dust became routine experiences during security alerts that could transition from peaceful travel to life or death combat within minutes. Hidden cargo techniques protected the most valuable merchandise from casual raiders, while maintaining the appearance of normal trade goods that wouldn't attract excessive attention from potential thieves. Camouflage, secret compartments, and diversionary tactics created security systems that relied on deception rather than pure military strength. Negotiation skills were often more valuable than weapons for resolving conflicts with raiders who might be willing to accept reasonable payments rather than risk casualties fighting well-defended caravans. The ability to assess threats, communicate effectively, and find mutually acceptable solutions could prevent violence that would be costly for both merchants and attackers. Picture navigating using landmarks that were essentially natural billboards advertising water, danger, or direction. Except these signs were written in geological formations, wind patterns, and environmental features that required decades of training to read accurately without making fatal interpretation errors. Rock formations served as permanent navigation markers that could guide travelers across seemingly featureless terrain, using distinctive shapes, colors, and arrangements that remained consistent across seasons and years. The sight of familiar stone outcroppings triggered relief and confidence in navigators who recognized geological features that confirmed correct routing toward intended destinations. Seasonal landmarks included temporary features like vegetation patterns, water accumulations, and animal activity that provided navigation information during specific times of year, but could be misleading or completely absent during other seasons. Picture trying to navigate using Google Maps that only worked during certain months and could provide completely wrong directions during off-seasons. Distance measurement relied on understanding camel travel rates, terrain difficulties, and timing factors that could predict journey duration between known landmarks under different conditions. Experienced guides could estimate travel time with accuracy that would impress modern logistics planners, calculating variables that included animal condition, cargo loads, and environmental factors. Rest stop planning balanced human and animal needs with security requirements and resource availability at locations that could support large groups for extended periods. The smell of cooking fires mixed with camel waste and human activity created distinctive aromas that indicated established stopping points where caravans could safely rest and resupply. Emergency landmarks provided backup navigation when primary routes became impassable due to weather, political conflicts, or environmental changes that forced dangerous detours through unfamiliar territory. Knowledge of alternative routes and emergency waypoints could mean survival when original travel plans failed due to circumstances beyond caravan control. Cultural significance of landmarks included spiritual, historical, and social meanings that affected travel decisions and community relationships. Some navigation points were sacred sites that required respectful behavior, while others carried historical significance that influenced tribal politics and territorial disputes affecting caravan security. The integration of landmark navigation with astronomical positioning created comprehensive wayfinding systems that could maintain accurate direction even when individual reference points became obscured or unreliable due to environmental conditions. Picture corporate management that had to function during zombie apocalypse conditions, where leadership decisions affected not just profit margins, but immediate survival prospects for hundreds of people whose lives depended on effective organization during months of extreme danger and resource scarcity. Caravan leadership required expertise that combined commercial knowledge, military tactics, survival skills, and diplomatic abilities that could resolve conflicts between diverse groups traveling together for extended periods. Masters who made poor decisions faced consequences that included financial ruin, community exile, and responsibility for deaths that resulted from inadequate planning or leadership failures. Social stratification reflected practical survival needs rather than traditional class structures, with positions determined by expertise, experience, and essential skills, rather than inherited status or wealth. The smell of cooking food, distributed according to hierarchy, mixed with the democratic necessity of sharing limited resources, created complex social dynamics that balanced inequality with mutual dependence. Decision-making processes had to balance speed with consensus during crisis situations where delayed responses could be fatal, but authoritarian leadership might create internal conflicts that threatened group cohesion. Picture management systems that required instant decisiveness combined with diplomatic sensitivity among people who couldn't escape from each other for months at a time. Conflict resolution mechanisms operated without external authority or legal institutions that could enforce settlements, requiring informal justice systems that could maintain order among diverse groups with different cultural backgrounds and competing interests. The taste of tension, mixed with the necessity of cooperation, created social environments where personal disputes had to be managed carefully to prevent broader group conflicts. Resource allocation followed hierarchical principles that had to account for individual needs, group survival requirements, and maintenance of social order during extreme scarcity, where distribution decisions could determine who lived or died. Leaders faced impossible choices about rationing that required balancing fairness with practical survival necessities. Communication systems linked different levels of caravan organization through formal and informal networks that could coordinate complex operations across large groups while maintaining security and operational efficiency. Information flow, command structures, and feedback mechanisms created organizational frameworks that functioned effectively despite the absence of permanent institutional support. Emergency leadership succession plans ensured continuity of command when leaders became incapacitated through illness, injury, or death during journeys where leadership failures could destroy entire expeditions, far from any possibility of external rescue or assistance. But all the logistics and security planning in the world couldn't prepare caravans for the ultimate challenge, transforming their own bodies and minds into desert survival machines capable of enduring conditions that would send modern humans straight to intensive care units within hours. Picture turning your body into a walking air conditioning system, using only layers of fabric, strategic ventilation, and design principles that would make modern athletic wear engineers take notes while crying into their moisture-wicking synthetic materials. Traditional desert clothing wasn't just fashion, it was wearable climate control technology that used physics principles to create cooling systems more effective than many modern solutions. Loose-fitting robes created air circulation chambers that used body movement to generate cooling airflow, while light colors reflected solar radiation that would otherwise turn human beings into walking ovens. The smell of sun-heated fabric mixed with natural dyes and the faint scent of protective oils created distinctive aromas that nomadic peoples associated with successful thermal management. Multiple clothing layers provided insulation that worked in reverse, keeping external heat out while allowing body heat to escape through carefully designed ventilation systems. Head coverings were essential survival equipment that protected against sun exposure that could cause fatal heat stroke within hours of unprotected exposure. Traditional turbans and head wraps created shade systems, sweat management, and eye protection that allowed extended outdoor activity in conditions that would send modern people running for air-conditioned shelter. Foot protection involved specialized techniques for walking on sand that could reach temperatures exceeding 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to cause serious burns through inadequate footwear. The feel of burning sand through thin soles became a constant reminder of environmental dangers that required continuous attention to protective equipment and movement strategies. Physiological adaptations developed over generations included increased tolerance for heat, more efficient sweating mechanisms, and improved kidney function that could conserve water more effectively than populations living in temperate climates. These weren't conscious changes, but evolutionary responses to environmental pressure that created human variants optimized for desert survival. Seasonal clothing adjustments meant that thermal management strategies changed dramatically between summer and winter conditions, with different layering systems, material choices, and coverage patterns that optimized comfort and protection for specific temperature ranges and environmental challenges. The integration of clothing with behavioral modifications created comprehensive thermal management that combined passive protection with active cooling techniques, allowing people to remain functional during environmental conditions that would incapacitate individuals without proper preparation and traditional knowledge. Picture designing housing that had to be your bedroom, dining room, storm shelter, and office, while being portable enough to pack on a camel and durable enough to withstand sandstorms that could strip paint off modern vehicles. Basically creating the ultimate RV using only animal skins and wooden poles. Traditional tents were architectural marvels that balanced portability with livability, creating structures that could be assembled quickly by experienced teams, but provided genuine comfort and protection during extended use. The sound of tent fabric flapping in desert winds became familiar audio that indicated secure shelter rather than structural failure, while proper setup created interior environments that were surprisingly comfortable despite external extremes. Ventilation systems built into tent design used airflow principles that created cooling effects during hot weather while retaining warmth during cold nights. Strategic openings, adjustable panels, and fabric arrangements created climate control that could be modified based on weather conditions and occupancy requirements without requiring permanent structural changes. Interior organization maximized limited space through furniture and storage systems that could serve multiple functions while remaining easily transportable. The smell of wool carpets mixed with cooking smoke and human habitation created distinctive interior atmospheres that transformed portable shelters into genuine homes during extended periods of nomadic travel. Weather resistance involved construction techniques and material treatments that could withstand sandstorms, heavy winds, and temperature extremes that would destroy modern camping equipment within days. Waterproofing, wind anchoring, and structural reinforcement created shelter systems that could function reliably in conditions that would challenge permanent buildings. Assembly and disassembly procedures required specialized knowledge and coordinated teamwork that could complete housing setup or breakdown efficiently during travel schedules that couldn't accommodate extended delays. Picture moving day that happened every few days, where your entire house had to be packed and ready to travel within hours of decision to relocate. Social space allocation within tents reflected cultural hierarchies, family structures, and privacy requirements that had to function within extremely limited square footage. Traditional tent layouts created distinct areas for different activities and family members while maintaining the flexibility needed for changing occupancy and social situations. Maintenance and repair of portable housing required ongoing attention and traditional skills that could address wear, damage, and deterioration using only materials and tools available during nomadic travel, ensuring that essential shelter remained functional throughout extended expeditions. Picture creating a diet plan where every meal had to provide medicine, energy, and psychological comfort, while being made from ingredients that could survive months without refrigeration in temperatures that would spoil modern food within hours. Essentially running a pharmacy disguised as a kitchen, using only dried, fermented, and preserved ingredients. Dates functioned as complete nutritional systems that provided calories, minerals, and natural sugars while remaining edible for extended periods without special storage requirements. The sweet taste of properly dried dates mixed with the chewy texture of concentrated nutrition became familiar flavors that represented both sustenance and successful food preservation in challenging conditions. Dried meat preparation involved techniques that created portable protein sources while preventing spoilage that could cause fatal food poisoning in environments where medical treatment was unavailable. Traditional jerky and similar preserved meats provided essential nutrition while remaining safe to consume weeks or months after preparation, though the tough, salty texture required strong teeth and patient chewing. Desert plants provided medicinal compounds that could treat digestive problems, respiratory issues, and other health challenges that were common during extended desert travel. Knowledge of edible and medicinal vegetation required expertise that combined nutrition science with traditional pharmacology, allowing experienced travelers to supplement their diet with wild resources that provided both calories and therapeutic benefits. Fermented dairy products created nutritional resources that could be produced and consumed during travel, while providing probiotics and other health benefits that supported digestive function during dietary stress. The sour taste of fermented milk products mixed with the practical necessity of consuming nutrition that supported gut health in challenging conditions. Water requirements for food preparation had to balance nutritional needs with conservation necessities, creating cooking techniques that minimized liquid use while maximizing nutritional extraction from available ingredients. Traditional cooking methods used steam, dry heat, and minimal water techniques that conserved precious liquid resources while creating edible meals. Seasonal dietary variations reflected changing availability of wild resources, different nutritional requirements during various travel conditions, and the need to adapt eating patterns to environmental challenges that affected both appetite and digestion during different times of year. Food storage and transportation techniques protected valuable nutrition from spoilage, contamination, and pest damage while remaining compatible with nomadic travel requirements, creating preservation systems that kept essential dietary resources safe and accessible throughout extended expeditions. Picture running a field hospital where your pharmacy consisted entirely of desert plants. Your diagnostic equipment was centuries of accumulated observation, and your treatment success rate had to be high enough to keep people alive in conditions that would challenge modern emergency medicine. Traditional healing combined botanical knowledge with practical medical procedures that could address injuries and illnesses using only natural materials available in desert environments. Wound treatment techniques used antiseptic plants, natural bandaging materials, and surgical procedures that could prevent infection and promote healing, despite the constant exposure to dust, bacteria, and environmental contamination that made even minor injuries potentially dangerous. The smell of herbal antiseptics mixed with the metallic scent of blood became familiar during medical procedures that required steady hands and traditional knowledge. Digestive medicine addressed stomach problems caused by poor water quality, dietary stress, and the consumption of unfamiliar foods that could cause serious illness in travelers whose digestive systems weren't adapted to local conditions. Traditional remedies included plants that could treat diarrhea, constipation, and other gastrointestinal issues that could become life-threatening during desert travel. Respiratory treatment handled breathing problems caused by dust exposure, dry air, and respiratory infections that were common during extended periods in challenging environmental conditions. Inhalation therapies, chest treatments, and breathing techniques provided relief for conditions that could impair physical performance needed for survival activities. Pain management relied on natural analgesics and traditional techniques that could provide relief from injuries, chronic conditions, and the physical stress of demanding desert survival without access to modern pharmaceutical pain relief. The integration of physical therapy, herbal medicine, and psychological support created comprehensive pain treatment using only traditional resources. Emergency medicine procedures addressed trauma, poisoning, and acute medical crises that could occur during travel through dangerous terrain, far from any possibility of outside medical assistance. Traditional emergency protocols required quick assessment, immediate treatment, and ongoing care that could stabilize serious conditions using only available materials and accumulated medical expertise. Training medical practitioners involved apprenticeships that combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience, treating real patients under actual desert conditions, ensuring that traditional healers could function effectively when their expertise was the only medical resource available to traveling communities. Picture your brain functioning as a combination GPS, weather database, medical textbook, and survival manual that had to store and organize information that could literally mean life or death for your entire community. Essentially, being a human Wikipedia that never crashed and could access crucial data even when you were delirious from heat exhaustion. Oral tradition preservation required memory techniques that could maintain accuracy across generations of transmission, while ensuring that essential survival information remained accessible and reliable. The rhythm of traditional songs and stories created mnemonic devices that helped preserve complex geographical, medical, and technical knowledge in forms that could be remembered and repeated accurately. Geographical memory systems stored detailed information about water sources, navigation routes, seasonal patterns, and environmental changes across vast territories that included thousands of specific locations and their changing characteristics throughout different times of year. Experienced elders could recite detailed descriptions of places they hadn't visited for decades, providing navigation information that remained accurate despite the passage of time. Cultural knowledge transmission included not just factual information, but also decision-making frameworks, problem-solving approaches, and survival priorities that could guide behavior during crisis situations when there wasn't time for extended consultation or research. The sound of elders reciting traditional knowledge mixed with the urgent necessity of learning information that could prevent future disasters. Memory palace techniques adapted traditional architectural concepts to desert survival needs, creating mental organization systems that could store and retrieve complex information about resources, dangers, routes, and procedures that were essential for community survival. These weren't abstract intellectual exercises, but practical cognitive tools that could save lives during emergencies. Redundant information storage ensured that crucial knowledge was preserved through multiple individuals and transmission methods, preventing the loss of essential survival information through accidents, illness, or death of key knowledge holders. Communities developed systems for cross-training and knowledge backup that could maintain information security even during disasters that affected multiple people. The calm, quiet narrative maintained accuracy in transmitted information through verification processes, practical testing, and correction procedures that could identify and eliminate errors that might accumulate during oral transmission across generations. The taste of failure, mixed with the necessity of absolute accuracy, created educational environments where mistakes could have fatal consequences. Integration of new knowledge with traditional information required systems for updating, modifying, and expanding accumulated wisdom based on changing conditions, new discoveries, and evolving survival challenges that demanded adaptive responses, while maintaining proven techniques that had sustained communities for generations. Picture designing an educational system where kindergarten included lessons on recognizing poisonous plants. Third grade involved navigation training that could prevent getting lost and dying. And graduation requirements included demonstrating survival skills that would challenge modern military special forces. Childhood survival training began with games and activities that taught essential skills through play-based learning that disguised life or death education as entertainment. Traditional children's games included water conservation, animal tracking, and basic navigation that prepared young people for adult responsibilities, while maintaining the fun and social interaction that children needed for healthy development. Age-appropriate skill progression introduced increasingly complex survival techniques as children matured and demonstrated competence with basic requirements. The smell of cooking fires mixed with children's laughter created educational environments where serious survival training occurred within supportive family and community contexts that balanced learning with childhood development needs. Memory training for children emphasized techniques that could preserve essential knowledge, while ensuring that crucial survival information was transmitted accurately to the next generation. Traditional songs, stories, and games created educational methods that helped children remember complex geographical, medical, and technical information that they would need as adults. Physical conditioning prepared young people for the demanding physical requirements of desert survival through activities that built strength, endurance, and heat tolerance gradually as children grew and developed. Traditional physical education included walking training, load carrying, and environmental adaptation that created physical capabilities needed for nomadic life. Social skills training taught children how to function effectively within community hierarchies, resolve conflicts, and maintain group cohesion during stressful conditions that could threaten community survival. The taste of shared meals and the sound of group activities created social learning environments that prepared children for collaborative survival that would be essential throughout their adult lives. Risk assessment education helped children learn to evaluate dangers, make safe decisions, and avoid potentially fatal mistakes, while maintaining the curiosity and exploration that were necessary for continued learning and development. Traditional child rearing balanced safety with the independence that children would need as adults responsible for their own survival and that of others. Cultural identity transmission ensured that children understood their heritage, values, and community responsibilities, while developing the individual capabilities that would allow them to contribute effectively to group survival and cultural continuity throughout their adult lives. Picture modern desert researchers using GPS satellites, advanced equipment, and emergency evacuation services, still struggling to survive in conditions that nomadic families mastered using only traditional knowledge, community cooperation, and survival techniques that were passed down through generations of people who turned impossible environments into home. Contemporary applications of traditional knowledge include water conservation techniques, sustainable agriculture, and climate adaptation strategies that modern environmentalists are rediscovering and adapting for current ecological challenges. The principles of resource efficiency, environmental cooperation, and adaptive resilience that sustained nomadic communities provide models for sustainable living that remain relevant despite technological advances. Archaeological evidence continues revealing the sophistication of traditional survival technologies, trade networks, and social organizations that functioned effectively across vast territories and extended time periods without centralized governments or institutional support. Modern researchers find remnants of engineering projects, navigation systems, and resource management that challenge assumptions about pre-industrial technological capabilities. Cultural preservation efforts attempt to maintain traditional knowledge that is disappearing as nomadic communities adopt sedentary lifestyles and modern technologies that replace survival techniques developed over centuries of desert adaptation. The taste of traditional foods mixed with the urgency of cultural preservation creates educational environments where ancient wisdom competes with modern convenience. Educational applications include survival training, environmental science, and cultural studies that use traditional nomadic knowledge to teach principles of adaptation, resource management, and community cooperation that remain valuable for understanding human resilience and environmental relationship. Traditional techniques provide practical examples of sustainable living that complement modern ecological theory. Climate change research utilizes historical data from nomadic communities to understand long-term environmental patterns, adaptation strategies, and human responses to changing conditions that provide insight into contemporary environmental challenges and potential solutions based on proven survival techniques. Economic lessons from traditional trade networks include principles of trust-based commerce, resource sharing, and cooperative competition that created successful business relationships across cultural boundaries without legal institutions or enforcement mechanisms that modern commerce depends upon for security and reliability. The psychological resilience demonstrated by nomadic communities provides models for mental health, stress management, and community support that could benefit modern populations dealing with anxiety, isolation, and environmental uncertainty that create challenges similar to those faced by traditional desert survivors. Friends, we've reached the end of our journey across the world's most challenging desert with some of humanity's most impressive survival experts. What started as a story about avoiding death by thirst became a masterclass in human adaptation, innovation, and the remarkable lengths people will go to transform impossible conditions into sustainable civilizations. These nomadic peoples weren't just surviving, they were thriving in conditions that would send modern survival experts running for air-conditioned vehicles and satellite phones. They created international business networks that connected medieval Europe to sub-Saharan Africa, developed technologies that rival modern engineering, and built social systems so resilient they sustained complex societies for over 1,000 years. Their legacy reminds us that human ingenuity isn't just about having the latest technology. It's about using whatever resources are available with maximum creativity, efficiency, and cooperation. While we complain about Wi-Fi outages and delayed flights, these desert entrepreneurs were building transcontinental commerce using camels, stars, and trust relationships that spanned continents. Perhaps most importantly, they understood that survival was always a community achievement rather than individual heroics. The shared water, collective navigation, and mutual support that sustained their desert civilization created both physical survival and social bonds that many of us miss in our individually climate-controlled modern lives. Tonight, as you reach for that glass of water next to your bed and adjust your thermostat, take a moment to appreciate both how far we've come and what we might learn from people who created prosperity through wisdom, cooperation, and refusal to accept that any environment was truly impossible. Drop a comment and tell us, what aspect of nomadic survival impressed you most? Did we help you appreciate your modern conveniences a little more? And where in the world are you staying comfortable while listening to this story about ultimate desert survival? Sleep well, friends, and remember that human creativity has always found ways to thrive even in the most challenging conditions. The solutions change, but the ingenuity that creates them remains wonderfully, inspiringly human. Sweet dreams and stay hydrated, however easy that might be for you.